Hey everyone, this is Raday here, author of the esteemed book, Stand to Reason, Blacks in the Bible. And we're going into chapter 2 right now, and chapter 2 is entitled Noah and the Boys. Pretty important chapter. Real quick, for those who don't know, little recap. Noah was in charge of building the ark. He lived in a time of pretty much, great iniquity, and God became displeased with man and all this other stuff. So the whole flood story, he flooded the earth. He told Noah to gather up like two of every animal, some more of some other animals or whatever, and then get on this ark. It was him and his three sons and their families, and they were to pretty much ride out the storm. And then once the ark settled and the water went away or whatever, and everybody's dead, kind of gruesome, but they step off the ark, and these are the people that um, are in charge of, well, were in charge of repopulating the earth. And the first section in this book is entitled Noah. So that's pretty much where we're going to start from now. And for those people who are under the assumption that Noah, wasn't black, like, you know, if you heard the introduction, then I told you that you're gonna need some common sense, right? Because if everybody comes from Noah, then and Noah isn't an African person, then you need to explain how how there's people walking around with a more dominant genetic makeup than what Noah himself would have had, who was supposed to be the father of humanity or whatever. The only way that I know that you can possibly get around this, because I remember I told you about Occam's razor and how there's if uh two things pretty much explain the same phenomenon, you go with the simplest one. Well, here's one of the more complicated ones. Pretty much at that time, they there's a lot of speculation going on, but some say it was aliens or it was angels or it was gods or whatever. All we really know was that the sons of God, pretty much had sex with the daughters of men or whatever. And at first they became known as tyrants, and then they became known as mighty men or men of renown. And that's kind of where I guess some would say that I guess black people came from, you know. Um, but pretty much, these people, these giants or whatever, were there before the flood, and I guess apparently they also survive after the flood, because when we get into, David and Goliath, Goliath is a Philistine, but he's also a giant. So I guess apparently they survive or something like that. So either way, I mean, it's confusing, right? But either way, if you're, a black person, then, I guess consider yourself lucky. You're either the progenitor of the entire race, or, you are like the descendants of gods and aliens and stuff. So either way, it's pretty cool. Hey, so the next section that we're going to get into is entitled Japheth. And for this and a lot of these other coming up sections, I'm going to be getting into the book a little bit because I don't want to misspeak, but at the same time, there's a lot of references and stuff that are going to be pretty important. And I don't want to, I'm not going to go into them all, but I'm going to pick out the ones that are pretty, important to the matter at hand. And like I said, this is the section on Japheth. And like I said, Noah had three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And these were the ones who were in charge of pretty much, seeding the earth. And pretty much where these guys went, this is where their descendants in particular went. And it's going to be their descendants that, we talk about. And so when you look at Japheth, the first descendant that I want to talk about, his name is Magog. And when we look at Magog, it says, if you look in the Strong's Concordance, it says that Magog is, well, pretty much he was a spawn to a barbarous or a barbaric northern region. Obviously, if you look at Africa or the Middle East or whatever, the only place that's above it, geographically speaking, would be Europe or Russia or pretty much where white folks are. You know, like I said, I'm not calling anybody barbarians, but that's what the Bible says. So and along with Magog comes a nation or a tribe or whatever called Gog, and Gog and Magog are kind of used um, synonymous with each other, and it says that these people are pretty much military minded, destruction oriented, and fixed on domination. That's what they do. I'm not gonna go, I'm not here to bash anybody, but that's what it says. The next is Javan or Javan. I'm not exactly sure. Probably, someone's going in a uproar right now, like it's called. I don't care. But Javan is translated into the Hebrew as Greek. So when you look at the Strong's Concordance, Javan and Greek mean the same thing. So obviously, the tribe of Javan or his descendants are, the Greeks. And let's see, under the tribe of Javan, not tribe, I'm sorry, one of his other descendants is called Ashkenaz. And this is pretty interesting because a lot of the Jews that we know today are known as Ashkenazi Jews. And when we look at Ashkenaz, if you look at the Strong's Concordance reference for him, is let's see, it's described as being a foreigner to the land. Take what you want from it. Oh, and another thing, when we go back to Javan or Javan or whatever, his name also kind of breaks down into another name, which means into another word meaning wine or intoxication. So we can kind of draw some of the similarities or whatever from that. And the next up is Kittim, Kittim, and Kittim is described as an islander, or pretty much someone opposite to that of Israel, Palestine, pretty much a Greek, Greeks, Romans, pretty much in that same general region. The next is Tarshish. That's why I really gotta get into it because I'm bad with names. I'm murder names. But Tarshish, and it's described as a merchant vessel of the region of the stone, or reverse. So we can kind of see that they're seafaring people. I'm not saying they were the first, but that's their main thing. And we look at the Mediterranean Sea, you can see the similarities. And also when we look at the term reverse, you can kind of see a people whose culture is kind of opposite to what the biblical writers would be used to. We can look at Southern Cradle, Northern Cradle type thinking, but I don't want to go too deep into that. Um, okay, one more thing that I want to bring up as far as Japheth and his descendants are concerned, um, is that I'll just cut this out. One thing, okay, very rarely am I going to use verses in here, but I think that this is important. When we look at Genesis 10:5 and we look at Japheth, we see that these and only these people are described as Gentiles, not anybody else. Um, Pretty much, a lot of times stuff kind of gets thrown around, and we go to church, and they talk about Gentiles or heathens or whatever, and pretty much along those lines, specifically Gentiles, like these are the only people that they're talking about. They're not talking about Africans or Hispanics or anybody else. We're talking about these people, which is clear because when we look at Paul, Paul is supposed to be the apostle to the Gentiles. Whether he was self-appointed or God appointed him is kind of whatever, but he's supposed to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And you can tell because when he started his ministry or whatever, he didn't go anywhere else but Europe. He didn't go anywhere else but Greece, Rome, that general area. He didn't go into Africa or anywhere. Like that's where he went. And another reason why I want to bring to the attention to use the King James version is because in the King James version, obviously it's one of the first. It is, pretty much the first version of the modern Bibles. But in a lot of Bibles, the word Gentiles is just taken out for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Some say, well, they're just trying to. I don't know what they're trying to do, nor do I really care. All I know is that in the King James version, they talk about Gentiles. They lay it out flat, and it's not sugar coated. And with that, we're gonna go on to Ham. So next up, we got Ham, and pretty much Ham. I mean, most people are pretty much in agreement that this is where black people come from. When we look at Ham, his name means hot from a tropical habitat. You also look and if you go a little bit deeper into his name, it means hot, warm. Goes down to be hot, literally or figuratively, excuse me, inflame, self, have, heat, hot. That's what it means. And some people are just difficult. I remember talking to somebody and they said, well, it says hot but it doesn't necessarily say black, and they couldn't really draw those distinctions. But I got something for you. When you look in Lamentations 5:10, it says, our Israelites skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. And it also says, our Israelites' skin is hot as an oven due to fever from hunger. When we look at things of that nature, and what we start to see is we start to see blackness in conjunction with heat, and which is pretty important. Because even then, when we look at the other part of it, when we talk about hunger and famine, when we look at, if you look at, and I hate to bring this up because this is a poor representation of what Africa really is, but when we look at, those starving African children or whatever, like, a lot of them are really dark skinned, and, in famine or whatever, black people have been known to get darker skin, which is in contrast to white people who get pale. And when we look at, like Holocaust pictures or whatever, and they're, uh, we see pictures of starving people or Jews or whatever, we see that most of them are pale and sucked up and, just almost pasty white. Um, but along those lines, I don't want to stay upon that for too long. Um, just like Japheth, we're going to talk about Ham's descendants because it's from these people that supposedly this is where all black people come from. And the first to name is Cush. And Cush is, if you look at Cush, it's Ethiopia, you know. And obviously there's a fair amount of black people there. Cush's notable offspring included Havilah. um, this is the land where the Fishon River, remember in Genesis, it talked about there's four rivers that flow through the Garden of Eden. Well, it's this land where uh, that one of the rivers flows, the Fishon River. Another notable ancestor to kind of talk about right now would be Nimrod. And Nimrod was known as the first heroic warrior on earth. He's said to be one of the mighty men, like the giants. And when we look at where he set his kingdom up, his kingdom was set up in Babel or Babylon. And when we take that into account, obviously Babylon, whatever, like that's right there in the Middle East. So this notion that black people were just in quote unquote Africa, where we know now and not anywhere else, is nonsense. The Bible tells us right here that a descendant of Ham, black guy, was the first to set up civilizations in what we now know as the Middle East. Um, da, 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 da. And another thing to go along with this is a verse, um, Amos 9:7. And in Amos 9:7, I'm gonna read this to you. Are ye not as children of Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, saith the Lord? Now, in this verse, excuse me, in this verse, we have God equating the children of Israel to the Ethiopians, and we obviously we can go a little bit deeper into this, and a lot of people say, well, we're all God's, obviously we're all the same or whatever, which I get is true, but like I said, when you have specific um, when you say something specific, it's for a reason. So if they were, so let's say we're all the same or whatever, why didn't he equate them to the Greeks or the Romans or anybody else in the region? Like, there's so many other people that you could have told the Israelites to equate them to, but yet, God chose them to be equated to the Ethiopians. That's, I mean, obviously for the prefaces of this book, I mean, that's pretty important. Ham's third son was God, I'm gonna murder this name, but Mizraim, and that I'm just Egypt, you know, Egypt and the Egyptians. Um, the, let's see. Another thing I want to talk about is in Isaiah 18:2. Because we also obviously Egyptians, they're black, but it gives them another description. Go swift messengers, take a message to a tall, smooth-skinned people who are feared far and wide for their conquests and destruction, and whose land is divided by rivers. Obviously, he's talking about. If you do a little research, he's talking about Egypt in this verse, and it's he equates them with a tall, smooth skinned type of people, and that's going to be important later on down the line. Um, and another one of excuse me, my mind's going blank right here. Another one of Ham's descendants, obviously, if you look, is the Philistines, right? So here's where we get Goliath and Delilah, who was just so irresistible to Samson, and we'll get to Samson a little bit later. But I guess it's important to see that for the pretenses of this book, or the Bible in general, that the Philistines, pretty much everybody in that region that we know as Africa and the Middle East, is described um, as being black. Ham's last son to talk about would be Put, which would be equated with Libya. So what we see is Northeast Africa, Egypt, Libya, that whole section right there. That's all black people, and the Middle East, pretty much all black people. So with that, we're gonna get on to the next section. The next section is off the hook. Now, we talked about curses and stuff, I think, in the introduction. And, one of the curses that I like to address is the curse that is the notion that Noah placed a curse on Ham, and thus his descendants, black people, are cursed, and that's why everything is going wrong with them. Just to give you a little backstory, Noah was a drinker, and he was drinking in his tent or whatever after the flood. And Ham goes in, sees something, sees his shame or whatever, walks out, tells his brothers. His brothers go in and cover him up. And, when Noah wakes up the next day, he says, "Cursed be Canaan." um da 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 da. Obviously, Canaan being Ham's son. But what I want to do right now, I want to pretty much read an excerpt out of the book, which is an excerpt out of another one, and this is from the Thomas Nelson's Publishers King James Version Study Bible, and it's on this exact thing that we're talking about. And this is what the people who pretty much revise the Bible say about this. Genesis 9:8, cursed be Canaan. The essence of this prophetic curse is that only the Canaanites are cursed, not all of Ham's descendants. Servants of servants literally denotes the most abject slavery. Even when the blessings are declared for the brothers, the theme of Canaan servitude was repeated both times. The Canaanites are white. In no way is this interpreted as a curse on the black race. The Canaanites inhabited Palestine and were first subjugated by Joshua and later by Solomon. They were partially exterminated by the Israelites, and their colonies were finally conquered by the Japhetic Romans. They practiced ritual prostitution, homosexuality, and various orgiastic rites, and were the center of God's prophecy of judgment in Genesis 15:16 to be carried out by Israel after the sojourn to Egypt. But the curse did not preclude individual salvation, for Rahab joined Israel, and Hiram, king of Tyre, gave the materials for the temple. Pretty much, just to sum that up, obviously it says, this was not a curse on all the black race, just Canaan. Uh, but even then, it says the Canaanites were white, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And it talked about servitude, right? Because a lot of times people, this was one of the excuses for slavery. They said, you guys are descendants of Ham and Canaanites or whatever, and a part of the Canaanite curse was servitude. So they said, well, you're slaves. This is the way it's supposed to be. Da 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 da. um, and kind of go a little bit deeper. I'm gonna read another little section out of the book. As far as Ham's innocence is concerned, it should be noted that the nakedness discussed in Genesis 9:20 through 27 was the Hebrew word erwa, which means shameful nakedness, as opposed to aram, which simply means nakedness or bareness. Verse 22 reads that Ham was the father of Canaan, yet it was still Canaan that was cursed. This would cause one to believe that in some fashion Canaan was involved in crude and inappropriate behavior with his grandfather. This sentiment is also echoed in the Hebrew, Greek, King James Version Study Word Bible, if one would like to verify for one's own research. Pretty much, I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory here. Like, why would Canaan be cursed? And it's just, if he was just an innocent person and all this, like, why just him? There's other stuff for this, but if you look at the words itself, then that shameful nakedness was used and not regular nakedness. So I'm not here saying that weird stuff was going on. I'm just here saying what the Bible says. The third son to talk about is Shem. And Shem is important because it is from Shem's line that we get, the Moses, Jesus, the Israelites, everybody, pretty much everybody that we like to talk about in the Bible. And these people are pretty much described as Asiatic people. There's not too much on this. They settle in, Asia or, the Middle East area. But at this point in time in the biblical story, um, there's really no indication that they shouldn't look anything different from you know than Ham or Noah. Pretty much at this time it's all black, and this even goes with Japheth too. This is why, I guess, just a little bit personal. I mean, I guess this is why, um, when people say, well, I just see us all as equal, and I see us all as da 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 da, and like, I guess as a black person or whatever, I kind of do. Like, we're all essentially some type or form of Africans. Before, like, if you are white or you're Mexican or you're whatever, there was a time in your history or period that you were black. Your ancestor, your whatever, you were black. And that's kind of the way that I see it. And at this point, people are still black. Like, now they're splitting up, and we're going into different regions, and now we can talk about how genetically people are starting to adapt and survive and change or whatever. Um, but still at this point, we're still looking at a world filled with black folks. But we'll get into that later on. There's a lot more to go. But that's going to conclude this chapter. Just keep staying tuned. Go on to the next one. It's going to be a great one. It's going to add to this. Hopefully, some things are going to make a little bit more sense. But with that, I'm out.